Okay.
The meeting
So Suzanne, I'm prepared to help facilitate with you today, and since our facilitator couldn't join us, so I thought if you were willing to kick us off, and then I can lead us through the agenda topics.
Absolutely. I just want to make sure I know which, got to get into a different mode or onto a different computer, but how many of our steering committee members are present and accounted for, Melissa?
Everybody is in.
Okay, great. Good morning, everybody. I am going to keep in this mode for now, and then I'm going to jump on my other computer once Jane gets started. So our agenda today, everybody should have, is for the steering council members. We have an agenda item number 1 to approve the minutes of the last meeting. And then Jane, our goal today is to finalize subcommittee memberships. It's going to be interesting to see how many of us feel like we're at that point yet with all of the data sent to us, but Jane can explain to us how this spreadsheet came about and what it means, and how best to navigate through that. The next agenda item is administration of the Climate Council and subcommittees, and I think that is around who's going to do the minutes, and just how are we going to stand up the underlying administration. But Jane can correct me if I'm wrong, if she's got something more in mind. We'll get update on our contracting services, do to public comment, go to public comment, and then adjourn. So with that, I will just start and find out if there's anybody on the steering committee with comments, concerns, or additions or deletions to the minutes of February 17, 2021.
I have a quick question about them, and it's probably for Jane, especially since CBI isn't here. Jane, on the discussion of the February 22nd full council meeting, there's a quick little bullet that says finalizing the charter, and I'm wondering, 1, is that charter the draft process roadmap? And 2, if so, I don't think we actually did that. Not that that needs to be changed in our minutes here, but something that I wanted to flag in this meeting for a conversation.
Yeah, so Lauren, that's a really good point, because I think the way that it was framed at the actual full council meeting wasn't the draft process roadmap at that meeting. It was actually the specific subcommittee descriptions,
okay,
which have been evolving in terminology. So they were components of the draft process roadmap. They've been pulled out, and we've been thinking about them most recently as charges to the specific subcommittees. So, and I think that's how they should be highlighted. Maybe a discussion of subcommittee charges at the 222 meeting.
Okay.
With expected
Jane, I guess with that, the question is, should we discuss modifying the minutes if they indeed are not as clear as they should be?
Yeah, I think with Lauren's comment, Melissa and I can revise.
Are there any other thoughts, discussion around the minutes as drafted, and allowing Jane and Melissa to move forward to make a modification consistent with Lauren's concern? Okay. Hearing and seeing no hands raised, I am going to just jump off and reboot on, but Jane, if you would like to start the second agenda item about subcommittee membership and the work of the subcommittees in the process that CBI provided everybody to use during those subcommittees. And I'll be right back.
Thank you, Secretary Young. So while Susanna's signing off and coming back on, I'll just remind everybody where we are in the process, and then I have a PowerPoint slide to hopefully guide our conversation. And I'll just say right out of the gate that my apologies and to the public and others here that these materials will be shared on the meeting right now, and then we'll update them to the website after the meeting today so that they will be available for digestion by the public. And so I just want to also suggest that I'm going to do my best to lead us through the conversation as best as David would with from CBI. So to remind you all, as of last week on Tuesday evening, the subcommittees and the council at large received the master spreadsheet specific to the 5 subcommittees with respect to how you all reviewed the nominations for your specific subcommittees. There were what was shown to you all on the spreadsheet specific to the 5 committees were where there was unanimous voting around consideration for the highest reviewed nominees, as well as second tier where there was large consistency but not unanimous for a higher review. So since then, all 5 subcommittees have met. They all sort of took a somewhat different tact, I should say, but generally consistent around discussion of the highest reviewed, and then put forward recommendations at this point for the final membership for the subcommittees. So I'm just going to share my screen. So give me 1 second. Okay, so what I was going to propose today, because as it's been presented to the 5 subcommittees, we have presented that they have put forward their recommendations to you as acting on behalf of the full council to review the composition of those 5 subcommittees and consider if we have what to do with duplicate nominees, which have occurred in only 2 instances, where 2 different subcommittees would like the same nominee to serve. And then also consider, based on what we have in front of us, if we are feeling confident that we have the geographic, BIPOC, age, and income diversity that we fully want. I was hoping that if I was willing to share with you, I'm going to stop sharing this and start sharing what I have with respect to both a Word document and an Excel spreadsheet that shows where we're at with the 5 final committee memberships, as well as if we'd like to toggle between that and the Excel spreadsheet, you can actually get a sense for where these folks are all located. I was hoping, without having asked you all, that perhaps with respect to the subcommittees that you all sit on, that you might elaborate on the discussion that was had at your specific subcommittees on how you made decisions around representation. If you're not feeling up for that or comfortable, I'm more than happy to do my best at representing that. And then for further thought, as we're digesting the subcommittee membership, I wanted to draw attention to the idea of, specifically with the cross-sector mitigation subcommittee, the idea of liaisons, specifically the 2 committees that have been identified as interested in having liaisons that sit in on the cross-sector mitigation to date had been the Science and Data and the Just Transitions committees. But I will, and I'm sure Lauren will back me up, that this idea has also come up with respect to other committees, especially the Ag and Ecosystems Subcommittee, where they're thinking about taking on the ag sector as well as the forestry sector actual mitigation targets. So good overlap with respect to those 2 committees makes sense as well. I'd also like to draw your attention to the agency staff for the 5 subcommittees. We've had quite a few agency staff who were originally tapped to staff the committees back out due to capacity. And so I just want to make sure as we're reviewing the 5 subcommittees that they have enough agency staff to support their work going forward. And then as we wrap up today, I thought I would just recognize that not all of the subcommittees are finalized. So we should set a target date for finalizing them, as well as setting forward a process for how they would submit any changes. And I would recommend that they would do that by our next steering committee meeting, which we don't actually have set yet, but I hope to discuss that today as well. So before I stop sharing this, is there any questions about this slide? Okay. Of course, I have a million things open. Okay, I want to open a Word document that I thought I had opened, but I must have closed it when I sent it to you this morning, Julie. Hold on. I have, just so you can see as a group the data, what we have now is this spreadsheet that has, first and foremost, this is what CBI shared with us all. We have the a summary sheet that shows the highest reviewed nominees for each committee. And then as I went through the 5 subcommittees based on conversations, I highlighted in yellow the nominees who have said yes and are sort of like clear go-aheads for each committee. And then some committees still had asks out as well as overlap with other committees. And so I highlighted those as green. And then just so you know, I have this final list here that shows the final selection, which is what I drew upon for the Word document that I'm hoping I can share with you all. So let me stop sharing and open that. My apologies for not having it open.
Jane, quick question while you're opening that.
Please.
So we don't have that yet, right? You're going to share it to us online?
Yep. Yes.
I have it open if you need it too, Jane.
Okay, I just opened it, but if you're willing to share it, Julie, perhaps that would be easiest because, you know, sometimes when you open a Word document when you're already in a Teams meeting, it's funny to try to find it to share.
Yep.
Thank you.
No problem. Hopefully folks can see that.
Yes. So you may remember this has been sort of the working draft that first and foremost illustrates the 5 subcommittees and then illustrated the co-chairs at the top, as well as the counselors and or their designees. So obviously for Joe Flynn, Joe Segali, people like that are highlighted in parentheticals below. So that was the existing membership, of which all of you had 2 co-chairs and 3 members, so 5. And what this shows in front of you now is the yellows are confirmed additional members to each of the 5 subcommittees. The red delineates where there's overlap between 2 committees, and the green is where the subcommittees have not confirmed. They have asks out. In the case of the resilience and adaptation, for instance, both Donald Campbell and Mindy Blank have been offered spots but haven't agreed. And then in other spots, people haven't even been reached yet, but they're people who are interested in serving. Secretary Young, you have a question?
I do have a question just in terms of the terminology we're using around the committee, the council's mission today. When you say confirmed members, what do you mean? Confirmed nominations, confirmed that they're interested, or confirmed by the subcommittees as something? So I think
I mean multiple of what you just said. So thank you for clarifying. They are confirmed in that the subcommittees want them on the subcommittees and that they have agreed to serve, but they are not fully vested as members yet, since the council, and in this case, the steering committee acting on behalf of the council, have approved their spot. So this is that final step, I imagine, in recognizing that the subcommittees would like these folks to join, but that you all, through this process, will see if there's any glaring omissions or problems with what's being put forward.
So my second question, and then I'll let you continue or open it up for other questions. This might be a good point before we dive too deep. There are still subcommittees, from what I heard you say, who are working on through their potential nominees interest list, and we're still awaiting kind of the final big picture.
Yeah, I think that this is the big picture reflective in front of you, except that not all of these people have agreed. So I guess in that you have the final slate of names, but you don't have the final slate of the yeses. So like on the resilience and adaptation, they have 4 confirmed folks that they would like to recommend to you, but they could come forward with 2 additional members at a later date. So I guess this could be a two-part process, and we can discuss this further, but I might recommend that if we see consensus and agreement that we could approve the yellow slate of names right now in this meeting, and then recommend that if additional members are considered going forward in that they say yes, that would have to come back to the next steering committee meeting for final approval. Jared, go ahead, please.
Just two quick updates. I just this morning got an email back from Linda McGinnis saying that yes, she would like to join Science and Data Committee. So that could be changed from green to yellow. And I should be listed as a member of the cross-sector mitigation.
Oh, yeah.
And not right now. And I would also just note those two names in green for cross-sector mitigation, both ranked highly and had a very similar skill set. So the process there was to identify which of those two would serve from Building Green in the Brattleboro area, not inviting both of them. So that would end up being one seat, one or the other.
Yes. Thanks, Jared. Well, so we could reflect that and I can make that change, just that I can have them both in one slot.
All right. So do you want me to make the changes to the table as we go, Jane, or are you going to update?
If you're comfortable doing that, Julia, that's great. If not, I can do it after the fact as I take notes.
Just so I'm clear, is that Candace Pearson and Nadav Mellon are both, it would be one or the other of them, but not both?
Yeah.
That's right.
And they both work for the same organization.
Okay.
Yeah. And then and I'll just maybe while we're talking this through and for Lauren's benefit and others, I think that, well, I know that I should say that Sarah Phillips and Sue Mintner of the Just Transitions Committee have agreed that if Judy Dow if the Ag and Ecosystems Committee would like Judy Dow, then they're happy to have Judy Dow participate with the Ag and Ecosystems Committee. And they just wanted to ensure her representation, and they thought she would be really great on the Ag and Ecosystems Committee. Lauren?
Yeah, thanks for that. I think the approach that I've heard from Abby Course, who's one of the co-chairs, is that she'll be reaching out to Judy and letting Judy kind of pick which she'd prefer to sit on. I'm glad to hear that Just Transition co-chairs are okay with letting Ag and Ecosystems have her expertise, but I think we're letting her make her own decision. And we should hopefully know that by the end of the week. And since my mic is unmuted right now, I'll say the last three, so Ben Mason, Jake Claro, and Olivia Pena, are all being confirmed hopefully this week. So you asked at the beginning if we should set a deadline. I think all of the subcommittees already have meetings scheduled for this week. So I'd recommend that hopefully by the end of this week, everyone can get their final suite in.
So me again, I have my hand raised. I don't know if anyone else does. I don't see that. So we have this document, which we're seeing for the first time. And then we have the spreadsheet that you showed a little earlier, Jane, that we haven't seen yet. I think all the steering committee has seen in toto is the big spreadsheet with the color coding from last Tuesday or Wednesday.
Which included everything except that extra added tab at the bottom that said final, which is nominees. So it had all the specific subcommittee nominees. So I just added a tab to that, trying to reflect these additional members specific to then pull them to put on this list. So we've seen it all except the final nominees from the subcommittees and this, which were coming in, at the end of the day yesterday still.
I guess if it's our job as the steering committee to ensure that we're comfortable, not so much with the people, but with the sectors being represented, the degree of expertise that's being brought to bear to these committees, whether there's overlap on any one committee with the same entity, just, you know, I think that's our goal, is to be able
Yes.
to look at this in toto to make sure we're all comfortable as a steering committee with, you know, just the diversity and I define diversity very broadly: geographic diversity, interest diversity, BIPOC diversity. So I'm trying to figure out if you've got one spreadsheet that kind of shows each one of these individuals who's been nominated, highly recommended, that kind of show us all of that, which I think is just the spreadsheet maybe you showed earlier, but maybe it's just a final spreadsheet at, you know, once all the final nominations come in.
Yes, I think you're right. That spreadsheet has their affiliation with their the organizations, and it also has their location geographically. So, and then it'll have the subcommittee that they're being nominated and selected for with respect to membership. So I think there's some in flux right now, but you're right that perhaps the best recommendation at this point is to recognize that the subcommittees are still finalizing, like to the detail of their recommended membership, and that is now expected to occur this week with the final asks out to these few folks that are still out there. And perhaps the best thing to do would be for the steering committee to then formally accept that at its next meeting, which would have a clear spreadsheet with the final selection without these sort of asks still out there that haven't been confirmed.
Well, I certainly would like to put that out there for the steering committee to react and you know, opine on. But I feel like, you know, that might be the next best step, but I would love to hear from others if they have other ideas.
Jared, do you have your hand up still?
I didn't intend to, but I'll take this opportunity to just say that I think there are some of those which were more obvious, some of those criteria that were more obvious to us based on the information that was provided. Some of those other criteria around diversity, we didn't have the information necessarily at hand, or it wasn't kind of included in the application. So, you know, just speaking for the cross-sector mitigation and science and data committees, I feel like, you know, there was definitely an attention to, you know, geographic diversity, because we had every kind of town and county. We had a general sense, although not an explicit sense, around, you know, race and age, you know, but, you know, on something like income, nobody was asked, you know, their income or wealth. So I think that there's going to be limitations based on the information we have, and at this point we have to do the best we can with the information at hand. And I feel most confident on the kind of questions of expertise and qualifications and experience and things like that, and on the geographic diversity.
Great. Good observation. Thanks.
Chris, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm on the Just Transitions subcommittee, and we took geographic diversity, BIPOC diversity, sector or area of expertise. We took a lot of different pieces into account when we were prioritizing members. Yeah, the income one is a tough one because we didn't solicit that kind of information. But I'm not exactly sure how to get at that one. But I think we did that to the secretary's point. I think that is, you know, part of the task of the steering committee is to, you know, kind of confirm that there's that kind of diversity across subcommittees. But my sense is that the directions to each of the subcommittees was pretty explicit. I know that there's a possibility of just coincidentally, as a group, you know, having less diversity, but you know, overall. But I suspect we're probably there.
Go ahead, Julie.
Just a couple of thoughts. One was, I think maybe Annette Smith had done it with the original council members, but somebody had plotted just a map of Vermont to show the overall distribution. I think something like that could be helpful here. And just a couple of things that jumped out at me. One, and Chris, I don't know if this came up in the Just Transitions Committee discussion, but depending on Jameson's answer, you're the only man on that committee, I believe. And I don't know if you looked at gender balance or diversity as part of your conversation. And then on the Agriculture and Ecosystems Subcommittee, appreciating that Ben Matchin does forestry work, I think, statewide. Our forests are disproportionately in the Northeast Kingdom, and I don't believe we have any representation from that part of the state. And just would encourage us to make sure we're thinking about that as well.
Do you want me to respond to that?
Yeah, okay, go ahead. I'll respond to the point about mapping too.
Okay. Yeah, we did actually discuss the fact that we had low representation of men, and considering that white men are, that's where a lot of the change needs to happen. We recognize that, but I think we agreed that this is a good, given the task that the Just Transitions subcommittee has at hand. I think we felt like that was okay. I'm trying to remember exactly how that was resolved, but I think we felt like, given our purpose, that it was going to be all right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think perhaps it was with your group, the Just Transitions, Chris, that we highlighted some of the rural resilience members with the overlap, like Dave Snedeker is a man in the Northeast Kingdom, and he's really a great asset to that subcommittee and perhaps could work across the multiple subcommittees. I'll just say that CBI had offered to map the highest reviewed nominees before selection was considered by the subcommittees, but they put it forward that it would take 6 to 8 hours to do that, and suggested that a better use of their time would be to sort of check the mapping once the subcommittees were selected. And so perhaps that would be a great next step if the steering committee moves to make their final approval at the next steering committee meeting of the final list. With that, we could have an action item to bring to the steering committee, a map of the final nominees for membership on the subcommittees to ensure that at the very least the geographic diversity that we wanted. And then my final point, just picking up on some of the comments, was Chris, I do remember that on the Just Transitions Committee, and my apologies for not remembering the name at this moment, but Sue was very conscious about selecting a member who had lived in poverty for and had sort of a spectrum of income awareness. And there was a woman who was selected who I believe was had sort of touched all aspects of that, and I can't remember who it is at this moment, but I can actually look at the notes while Secretary Young speaks.
Oh, I think maybe we're getting a little too deep in the weeds about, we're already at our time on this particular topic. I just wanted to, and it sounds like we're going to circle back around with more information by at the time that the subcommittees finalize their nominations. We'll have some additional information for just this group in a organized fashion, so we can all take a look independent of the next meeting. We could raise issues like the good one that Secretary Moore just raised about just transitions, and I think that's where we're headed with this. So I'm a little uncomfortable getting into the detail of each individual at this point. My concern about the mapping is 6 to 8 hours of a contractor's time mapping where Manchester, Starksboro, and Newport are on a map. I think that we all kind of know as Vermonters where once we see where these people live and work on that broader spreadsheet, we can kind of do that ourselves. I guess I just want to use our contractors' time wisely.
My expectation is that that was because of the girth. There was 200 and, a lot of nominees. And so my hope is this would be a much smaller exercise once we had the final list. So.
All right, well, that makes sense then, thanks.
Yeah, so before we move on from this agenda, because I'm hearing consensus on more information needed and the final selection in front of the steering committee to approve. I just want to check in on guidance on how to begin to involve the people who have been selected on the subcommittees at this point, because I suspect that will be something co-chairs ask as they're, diving into meaty issues and work in the coming weeks, thinking about contractual needs and technical services. I expect that they would like to have as many members present as possible. So I put that out to all of you before we move on about how to involve or engage these folks currently without sort of final approval by the council in place. Jared, go ahead.
I'll circle back to that question, and I agree and see the value in having all of these folks mapped. I will just say across the 10 folks who were nominated for to join the subcommittees for science and data and cross-sector mitigation, of those 10, only one, or I should say it this way, 2 are from Rutland County. I'm combining them. 2 from Orleans County, 2 from Lamoille County, 1 from Windsor County, 1 from Windham County, 1 from Addison, and 1 from Chittenden. So I think if we are starting, if there was an initial concern or question about the representation of kind of Chittenden and Washington counties in the council makeup, which I haven't looked explicitly at those numbers, my sense is certainly across those other 2 subcommittees, we have significantly increased the representation and geographic diversity across the subcommittees. So I think, yes, it'll be good to see, but I feel very confident in at least this initial slate significantly achieves that goal.
Great, thank you. Were you willing to speak to my question as well, Jared? To put you on the spot.
I have two thoughts. Like, is there, like, I guess I can, I'm thinking on the fly, imagine 2 possibilities. One is kind of a provisional approval before a final one, or B would just be inviting them to join as kind of, candidates, but still allow them to participate in the meetings. I don't think if we feel like this is they're likely to move forward as members, and it's more of just making sure we've got the balance right in that kind of last step in the formal process, I wouldn't want to delay their ability to actually participate in the meetings, given the amount of work we have before us, and that a lot of these subcommittees are envisioning these next meetings as kind of orientations for those members, or at least science and data and cross-sector mitigation are, so that we can then really dive into the work.
Yes. So I'm hearing sort of two suggestions by Jared. One being a provisional approval of membership, or 2, consideration of these folks as candidates who actively participate in the meetings for the next 2 weeks. Julie?
I was just gonna offer that, and I know you and I have talked about it, Jane, and I can't remember if we've talked about it here, but just that there's the process we need to go through to round out the subcommittee membership, but the subcommittees also, in all likelihood, need to start working now, right? And I don't know that we can necessarily hitch those 2 pieces together. And I appreciate the point you're raising, Jared, about wanting to integrate people as soon as possible into the larger work. But we do, at a minimum, have to go back to the whole of the council, I think, with this slate before we can really sort of fully onboard people. And just want to flag that I hope that subcommittees are moving forward sort of in parallel in the work of the technical work of their charge, along with naming these additional members.
Just one point of clarification, Secretary Moore. is the full council going to weigh in? Is that the goal, is for the full council to weigh on this at the end of the month? Or is it just the steering committee to kind of take that final look, see in the next week or so once we get all the information and ask folks to move forward? So maybe Jane can remind us what the role of the steering committee versus the subcouncil is in this regard. I mean, the whole council in this regard.
The way it was presented in the milestones and the way we shared it with the council at the last meeting was that the steering committee would act on behalf of the council to approve the membership.
Perfect, thank you. So I think we can get that done as quickly as we get the information from the subcommittees. It shouldn't be too much longer. And may even just be a brief steering committee meeting in the next week.
Yep. Liz, or I'm sorry, Chris first and then Liz.
I'm wondering, I thought, Jane, correct me if I'm wrong, I think you were Just Transitions, weren't you? I thought we had finalized our steering committee choices. Is it possible to go ahead, for those who have finalized choices, for the steering committee to go ahead and make that decision today? And then on the other, then there's a whole other, to the other question of subcommittees going forward. The understanding within Just Transitions is, yeah, we're going forward with the work of the subcommittee, with the understanding that as new members come on, nothing is set in stone. That if new ideas will be, of course, solicited, but and things that arguments made, new information presented. If there was something that the subcommittee had done previously that we needed to revisit, of course, we'll revisit that. But the idea was to try to keep on trucking until the membership is set.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So Chris, just to respond quickly and keep us moving. The way Sarah and Sue presented it to me this morning was that the names shown in yellow are the final selection for the Just Transitions, but there are 4 additional members under consideration, and I never got clarity on what that really meant. So while I think your list is so close to being final, it felt like there were still some questions out there about these additional members that I couldn't close the door completely on those folks yet. So after Liz speaks, we can try to wrap this up with consensus on how best to approach inclusion of those members going from here on. Go ahead, Liz.
I just wanted to weigh in favor of where Jared was heading, and I think Chris, with regard to the steering committee's ability to sign off, as it were, on the confirmed folks that the subcommittees have asked to join and that have said yes, just based upon a couple of things. Probably most importantly for me, the fact that there are still some white spaces below the names, meaning that there is opportunity, as Chris just pointed out, to both modify / add individuals, as well as an intention on the subcommittees I'm aware of to have other interested individuals participate. And then finally, I'd like to move on, if there's a consensus on that first point, to the next topic, which is my understanding of kind of designees or representatives across committees, particularly Just Transitions and Science and Data. That was very important to cross-sector mitigation, and also played into our thinking on committee membership, making sure that we would have some other voices from those subcommittees that would help in our work.
Yeah. Thank you, Liz, for circling back to that. So let's take a pulse and see, is there consensus then at this point to approve the names in yellow, recognizing that there's still work to be done to review the final suite of nominees at the next steering committee meeting, if and when that changes at all? Lauren?
I'm happy to move forward with that. I'll just say those last 3 again, Ben Mason, Jake Claro, and Olivia Pena, and Ag and Ecosystems are technically still green. So okay. The only 3 we'd be able to move forward with are the top 3.
Okay, thank you. Chris, Liz, either of you still have comments?
And Judy Dahl isn't confirmed either way, but the thinking is that should she say yes, she would be part of the Agriculture and Ecosystem Subcommittee.
If that's what she chooses herself.
Okay,
I'm here.
I see. So I'll leave it the way it is then.
Yeah, and Lisa Ryan is the same too. She, I think she personally has not committed to any committee yet, but if so, we're airing towards science and data for Lisa and Ryan. Is that correct?
Yes, if she did not have a choice,
Yeah.
Her preference, I guess I should say she has a choice. If she didn't have a preference.
And then I guess, so let me just leave it at that for this, and then I can ask my question after, and just make sure are we feeling comfortable with the yellow names at this point being approved as members of the committee?
Yes.
Okay, great. And then my next question was just to draw attention to Liz's point around liaisons. At this point, I'll just highlight that Jared, I think you're viewed as a liaison between cross-sector mitigation and science and data, serving as a member on both. And that's one model, is to have a member on two committees. I also think that the way that Just Transitions, and Chris, you should speak up, when I shared that idea with Just Transitions at your meeting this past week about a liaison, we were thinking more perhaps about a subcommittee member who would sit. I'm not quite, I guess I ask you all, do you see them as full members of the other subcommittees, so that they're like Jared, they're serving on two subcommittees, including cross-sector mitigation, or their primary work responsibilities lie with Just Transitions, and then they sit in on cross-sector in order to take in information and go back and forth with the two committees?
I believe the latter, Jane, in the case of Just Transitions.
Yeah. So I guess what I would suggest, recognizing that we're short on time, I would take the pulse and see if the idea of having liaisons with merely Just Transitions and science and data who are in service to the other subcommittees, specifically with cross-sector, recognizing that a lot of their work will come out of cross-sector mitigation, makes sense, and leave it to the subcommittees to propose, specifically Just Transitions, to propose that for the next meeting of you all? Or do you see a need or recognition for liaisons with cross-sector from also ag and ecosystems and rural resilience and adaptation? And if so, should I bring to those two subcommittees that idea, knowing that ag and ecosystems, Lauren has already talked about that a bit, but also putting forward to them that idea so that they would nominate somebody within their subcommittee to try to participate in as many cross-sector mitigation meetings as possible as well. That seems just a recognition that will be a lot of work. And I asked the question of if that regular meeting is needed, or if there's some added coordination that just we know has to happen with all of the subcommittees and cross-sector mitigation as an ongoing need. And we could take that up as a steering committee, and how best to do that at our next meeting, or a meeting to be determined. Julie?
I was just going to offer, I think we need to let the committee sort of get up and running first before we make too many decisions about how to connect across subcommittees. Some of this may become more apparent as we lay out the charter for our work. But I think right now making those decisions is in part hard, just because we haven't fully settled on exactly what each of the subcommittees is going to be doing and how they're going to approach it.
Jared?
I would just note that we did explicitly say in the cross-sector mitigation committee meeting last week that we would like for the Just Transitions Committee to identify somebody who would serve as that liaison, either in a formal role or whatever kind of worked for them. I would also just note that I do see a connection between all of the subcommittees, and then specifically between cross-sector and the other 4 committees. Although I would say that at least on its face, it strikes me that there's an even greater rationale to have a liaison and somebody serving on both committees from cross-sector and ag and ecosystems, given the overlapping responsibility and desire to be designing mitigation measures, which is going to be one of the main focuses of the cross-sector mitigation committee. And I don't believe, unless I've missed something in kind of their draft committee charge documents, that resilience and adaptation is focusing on kind of mitigation strategies at this point.
Yeah. Lauren?
Yeah, I'll just jump in and say the Ag and Ecosystem Subcommittee 2 meetings ago, when we talked about our charge, really did all unanimously agree that we were interested in taking the first stab at the conversations for identifying emissions reduction opportunities from both agriculture and forestry sectors, which has a lot of overlap, obviously, with the work within cross-sector mitigation. And then to a lesser degree, but still pretty significant, would be the conversation between the 2 groups that would need to be had about siting for renewable energies and impacts to our land. So those two different opportunities, I think that it does make sense to have a liaison from Ag and Ecosystems. I think we're adding it to our conversation later this week when we meet. So I'll leave it to that full subcommittee to have that conversation on how we want to proceed. But Secretary Moore, good point that we're all just kind of, for lack of a better term, like flailing, trying to understand how and where to show up. So I don't know if we're making a recommendation now, but I would ask that this Ag and Ecosystem Subcommittee have the opportunity to talk that over first.
Great.
So I'm hearing that it's that subcommittees are actively talking about how to liaison with other committees where there's overlap, that those conversations are ongoing. It sounds like a great idea. I think the challenge will be, what are you going to expect from the liaison and how much time are they going to have to, attend multiple committees? So why don't we table this until, again, the subcommittees are going to be meeting this week and maybe flesh out a little more what their thinking is. I think
that sounds great, Secretary Young. And I'll also suggest that we table for specific subcommittee discussion capacity of agency staff, and if they have enough to sort of move the charge of the subcommittees forward, because I think specifically the rural resilience, which is actually no steering committee member here serves on that one. That is the one that feels the most short-staffed in my mind, because most of those staff have bowed out. So I'll work to take that up with the subcommittees specifically and make sure if more agency staff are needed, that the right agencies are contacted to consider more appropriately. So moving on briefly, I think that I recognize that we just have 5 short minutes before we move to public comment, and I want to be true to that. And I think I left a lot of time for administration. So I'm going to share my screen for 1 minute and try to pose what I see as the most important question out of that at this time. Okay. So many of you there have been a lot of questions and a lot of discussion around the administration of subcommittees in particular, and then of course administration more broadly for this work going forward. So I wanted to, make everyone on this steering committee aware that Melissa and I are working this week on developing a cheat sheet, so to speak, for compliance with the open meeting law, as well as being able to provide some templates so that the administration on our end is easier going forward, so that subcommittee chairs who are preparing agendas and subcommittee members who are working with them to prepare minutes are all putting forward consistent documents to the best of their ability. So that's forthcoming, and we will share that with subcommittees in the future. Perhaps what I ask of all of you, if you all would like to review those materials at our next steering committee meeting prior to going out to the subcommittees with that document. So you can think about that for a minute. And then I'll draw your attention to a recognition that there is inconsistency at this point in how we're taking meeting minutes, to be expected, considering it's not one person taking minutes for all the meetings. So trying to put forward a consistent approach to how we take minutes, and recognizing that for now, the administrative burden of taking minutes rests with the subcommittees, and trying to make those minutes as easy as possible to take, recognizing that there's also a video that accompanies the minutes as they get posted on the website. So we're asking that those minutes be very high level, and recognizing that the most important things to capture in those minutes are action items and or where consensus is reached on topics. And then the question right now that's out there is how to deal with public comment in the minutes. The approach to date has been a reflection that there is public comment period in the minutes. You can reflect, the suggested approach has been to reflect that public comment has been received, but not to note the specific comments in the minutes, the written minutes. And I bring this up now because there's been significant pushback by some subcommittees on the fact that we don't call attention in word writing that the specific public comments. So I was encouraged to bring this to the steering committee to consider how best to do this going forward, recognizing, just recognizing that it needed your attention to employ a consistent message. So I'm going to stop sharing and leave it at that for some discussion for a minute. And then I just wanted to also briefly acknowledge the ongoing conversation about Teams and Zoom that has been happening behind the scenes, recognizing, that that's happening. And I can update you all on where we are with that. Go ahead, Lauren.
Thanks, Jane. So as we're talking about administration, I do also I wonder if this steering committee should, in the near-ish future, since we don't have much time today, talk about that draft process roadmap, which I'm considering kind of to be the spine behind which each of the subcommittees understand the steering committee, all of us that we can rely on heavily to how we all run as a big machine. Just recognizing that there are some edits that are still out there. We haven't had a conversation yet as a steering committee or as a full council to flag that as an item for the next couple of meetings for us.
Thank you, Lauren. Anything to add or thoughts on public comment specifically? Jared, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to follow up on what Lauren said. Given the amount of times that we reference back that roadmap, but that we haven't kind of formally agreed to it yet, that if we could do a process, I was just looking at the calendar, we've got a March 22nd council meeting, and then I think another steering committee meeting March 15th. I wonder about a process of collecting any kind of comments or edits on that by the 15th, so the steering committee could kind of look at that and then have a kind of, draft that we recommend the council adopt on the 22nd. I think it would help give us more kind of clarity to get that finalized and have us all be able to build on and work from that.
Julie, go ahead.
I was just going to weigh in on the question you'd asked about public comments in the minutes. I think the less is more approach is really both appropriate and important here, in large part because there's no real opportunity or necessarily guarantee that the member of the public would have the opportunity to ensure that their comments were accurately reflected in the minutes, unlike the rest of us, where when we're raising points, we're able to, in reviewing draft minutes, say that reflects what I tried to convey, or no, that doesn't. I think acknowledging who spoke may be appropriate, but beyond that, I don't think we want to get into the substance of it because we could create an erroneous record, and it is better to refer people to the raw comments in the videos.
Chris, go ahead.
And is the plan, I was going to echo Julie's point, is the plan to, let's say we move into a post-COVID period, and we actually start meeting in person, is the idea to continue with the recordings and archiving of those recordings? Because if so, I think that makes sense, because then you can actually see what was actually said by whom.
Well, I haven't thought that far into a post-COVID world, but I imagine there'll be one. And I imagine that I guess I would ask, I've served on councils or public meetings, like public bodies like this. Are they recorded with actual videos that are posted, or what has been the past course of business?
I can offer, at least I think for the purposes of the Clean Water Board, we've always had like an opportunity or an ability for remote participation. And as a result, I think there is some sort of recording. I don't know that it's a video recording, but because of that, and I can't imagine we would be able to go to a posture where we preclude remote participation even in a post-COVID environment.
Yeah.
Yeah, I suspect that is going to be life going forward. It's more ever after. So,
so I guess recognizing time, I would just ask. I think Secretary Moore, your comment about naming just names of people who spoke might get at one of the concerns, which was around searchability of PDFs. So if you're looking for a specific comment, perhaps it's just listing the names. At least that is a trigger for folks to search minutes. And so perhaps that's a common ground where we just list names who spoke, but not the comments. And that's what I'll put forward to the subcommittees. Okay. And then just to wrap this up quickly, I'll just recognize that we have been continuing on with conversations around Zoom versus Team, and the recommendation at this point, and please, Secretary Young or Moore, speak it up if I speak out of turn with the way I characterize this, but the recognition at this point is that we are, as I'll update you, we have made a selection for a facilitator at this point. As of last week, we have selected CBI out of the 5 bidders to advance a contract with. So we are still in a contract negotiation phase, but our hope is this week that we move towards signing a contract with CBI if we finalize negotiations. Our approach has been to stick with teams, recognizing that that is what is supported by the state until we have the contract in place with the facilitator, recognizing that we can have a conversation about the best platform that a facilitator is used to using, at which point that they would have to take on some of the administrative burden and back work of Zoom, and how we, if it was Zoom or whatever the other platform was. And I've also been working on sort of ground truthing the memo that CBI prepared, which tried to state the differences and benefits between Teams and Zoom. With I know our Fish and Wildlife Department has used Zoom for public meetings, so I have them running through the memo, trying to understand what Teams can and can't do and what the benefits are versus the 2 platforms. So we are working behind the scenes, and our hope is, with respect to having a facilitator on board, working with them on what the platform they are used to using is, and helping work with them to advance the platform that makes the most sense collectively for administration through state accounts as well as their own contract. So I don't have a clear answer, but I just wanted to put that we are still talking about it behind the scenes.
I would also add, thanks for that, Jane. I would also add the state has been limiting its applications. It's very costly to taxpayers for us to have numerous applications across the enterprise. And the Teams at the time was the most secure platform when it was adopted. That's not to say that there aren't waivers that have been granted, but we're trying to understand if this is an appropriate time to have a waiver. And also trying to understand how much more of a burden is this going to be on each subcommittee, who's going to be responsible for managing the Zoom meetings, how much more staff we need to staff up in order to be fully, conversant in Zoom meetings. So it is an area of expertise we don't necessarily have built within state government, and the staffing of Zooms as yet another platform. So those are all, that's an array of the things that we're trying to work through with our digital services agency, as well as talking to some of our sister agencies who've had the opportunity to use it for public meetings. And I mean, I understand the desire for it, but it's not a click of the, a snap of the fingers to make it happen. Thank you.
Chris and Julie, do either of you have comment before we wrap up?
I do, just a quick one on Zoom. I think the issue that, one of the biggest issues I see with Teams is that I can tell you my functionality seems to be different than others who have whatever version of Teams they're using. I'm using an app on a Microsoft Windows-based system. I know we've had others say that their experience with Teams is different using Mac platforms, Apple platforms. And so it's almost like there are equity issues here. Whereas with Zoom, everybody's basically has the same experience. With Teams, it's almost like, let's say if you're at a town meeting and this person can have this experience, this person can have another experience and can participate in different ways. So I think there's actually an equity question here. It's not just, you know, which program is more secure and it makes the most technological sense. I think it's actually gets to the issues of fairness of participation. So I just wanted to add that to the decision-making calculus.
I think that's a great point, Chris. Thank you. Duly noted. I'll just say to wrap up this conversation quickly, as I just alluded to, we've selected a facilitator. We're hoping to work through that process this week. The outreach RFP is closing. The outreach and public engagement one is closing this week. I'll just note for you all to be thinking about, we have Sue Mintner and Sarah Phillips participating in that review process. And if there are others on your subcommittees, I can bring that up this week with respect to anybody who would like to sit in and review proposals. We have a big team at the state, but we also are trying to do a better job this time engaging with actual counselors to review and help us select and award the contract. And then lastly, just to comment, I will follow up with Secretary Young and Secretary Moore on their schedules, but this time does not work for Liz going forward as a steering committee meeting. So I've removed the meetings going forward that I had sent out to you all. This is a standing leadership team meeting for Liz. So thank you for skipping again today to be with us. And I'll work to find a date and time that works consistently for the secretaries and then put it forward to all of you to confirm that it works for you going forward. So I'll leave it at that. And Suzanne, I'll turn it over to you if you'd like just to wrap us up and do public comment.
Yeah, I think we've decided to defer some of our decision making until the subcommittees have another chance to meet and work through some additional items. We are going to be continuing our research into Zoom, and I appreciate, Chris, your comments on equity around Zoom, and it is one of the questions that I think I've raised with Jane anyway. Is this a training issue? Is this an application issue? And have we really rolled it out, effectively? If we're going to use it, I would want to make sure we could resolve some of those equity issues. So I appreciate that. But I do want to be mindful of the public's time. They've been waiting for about 10 minutes to offer public comment. So if folks are ready to wrap up substance of the meeting, we can move to the public comment. Jane, is folks okay with that?
Yes, thank you.
Great, thank you.
If there's anybody in the public who would like to speak up or raise their hand, please feel free just to talk or raise your hand and I'll call on you if that's more comfortable. I also don't see any comments from the public in the chat either, so.
Okay, well, thank you, everybody. I appreciate your few extra moments of your day today. What's next, Jane? We have we're going to reschedule the next steering committee meeting. Fine with that, for sure. We want to make sure it works for everybody. I'm available evenings and weekends, if that helps. Also, the next full meeting of the Vermont Climate Council is March 22 for everybody's calendars, and subcommittees are continuing to meet. We hope to hear from them by the end of the week in terms of more nominees for membership. Okay, well, thanks everyone. See you later.
Have a nice day.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.